less. You know, it's interesting in 1910 that you have to make a case for this, that the draper's assistant has that capacity for beauty and joy.
There are a lot of parallels between Mr. Wells and Mr. Polly. Wells, like Polly, was a man of the lower middle classes. Born in Kent in 1866, his father a shopkeeper, his mother a housekeeper. Like Polly, he was indeed a draper's assistant, and he was married to a cousin. He was an autodidact, a voracious reader. So far, so Polly. But Wells won a scholarship to study biology, then worked as a science teacher before turning to writing professionally and becoming a world-famous author. He left his first wife for one of his students before leaving his second wife after a string of affairs with remarkable women, including the writer Rebecca West. He knew or met just about everyone who mattered back in the day: George Bernard Shaw, Joseph Conrad, Henry Ford, Teddy Roosevelt, Joseph Stalin, Sigmund Freud. From inauspicious beginnings, Wells's life was ultimately extraordinary, far too extraordinary for me to go into here. Mr. Polly is what Wells might have been had he not changed his course. In the history of Mr. Polly, Wells is partly satirising himself, poking fun at the jumped-up clerk, and yet at the same time, it's also a furious book, a condemnation, a railing against the British class system and its deliberate, endless lowering of horizons for the lower classes. It's a book with a chip on its shoulder about a man with a chip on his shoulder. Dr. Caroline Sumter again.
I always think the phrase chip on your shoulder sort of suggests the problem is with the individual rather than with the society that you're looking at. People from that class are as funny and problematic and angry as people from other classes, and as frustrated, but they have this additional set of restrictions in that they don't get to have the education to decide where they would fit.
I'm Ian Sansom, and this is Opening Lines, and we are leafing through The History of Mr. Polly, the 1910 satirical novel by H.G. Wells. As well as the book's account of Mr. Polly's coming to terms with his personal ambitions and disappointments, and its scathing analysis of the British class system, the other thing that Wells succeeds in doing is portraying the power and potential of language and of ideas. Mr. Polly's ambitions and lack of power are reflected throughout the book in his inventive but inaccurate use of language.
Words attracted him curiously. New words had terror and fascination for him. He did not acquire them, he could not avoid them, and so he plunged into them. He avoided every recognised phrase in the language and mispronounced everything in order that he shouldn't be suspected of ignorance, but whim. Sesquipledan, he would say. Sesquipledan verbujus. Eh? Said Platt. Eloquent rhapsodus. But where? Asked Platt.
Academics come in and talk about this and beat all the joy out of books. Probably Mr. Polly would say a jawbacious academic comes in and all the joy is gone and all the jokes are gone because you've beaten it within an inch of its life. It's actually really funny, and I think the interesting thing was for Wells that for him literature does give him this way of narrating the world that is really creative and funny and clever. I think the critics who look at this book and think that he's just misusing words have missed what's going on, because he's getting at a thing that the words that exist can't really get at various points.
High old jawbacious argument we had, I tell you. I tell you, sir. I tell you, sir. Furicacious.
Wells suffers the fate of many great stylists, which is that he isn't usually valued as a stylist because his style is so seemingly effortless. The book dazzles with its various special effects. It begins in the midst of things. There are lots of daring jump cuts and fast forwards in the chronology, as well as lots of tiny little authorial interventions and asides throughout. And it's a book that proceeds via a series of grand, almost cinematic set pieces. There's a funeral, a wedding, a fire, a fight, and and then some wild confrontations with the mysterious Uncle Jim, Wells is in fact a genuine oddity among English novelists, a jack of all trades who doesn't fit into any easily definable category, not unlike Mr. Polly.
It's actually about wanting to fit in. Points when he does fit in with Parsons and Platt, they're trapped in this awful job that none of them want to be in. But there is this real joy of companionship, and the notion that books can be a collective thing and that they read together. That's one of the things I really like about this book. It suggests that literature is something potentially accessible and for everybody, and it's not just about evaluating a canon of culture, but just reading what you like. The joy in reading books, that's one of the quite magical things I think about Mr. Polly.
Trapped in our lives, impotent, raging, seeking escape, we can all perhaps recognise at least a part of ourselves in Mr. Polly. And so perhaps, like him, we might be able to find a way out, or way in, though not perhaps by burning down the house.
If the world does not please you, you can change it. There is only one sort of man who is absolutely to blame for his own misery, and that is the man who finds life dull and dreary. There are no circumstances in the world that determined action cannot alter.
I'm Ian Sansom. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Opening Lines about the history of Mr. Polly by H.G. Wells, with contributions from Dr. Caroline Sumter and readings by Stephen Mangan. It was produced by Laura Grimshaw, and it is a peer production for BBC Radio 4. All the episodes so far are available on BBC Sounds, where you can also subscribe to the series.
And you can hear our adaptation of the history of Mr. Polly, narrated by Stephen Mangan, just after the news.
The promise of spiritual advancement.
After the yoga classes, I felt amazing.
An unexpected journey into the dark side of the wellness industry.
That event was quite out of control.
Were you surprised by how sexual this camp was?
Yes.
I'm Kat McShane, and I'm investigating disturbing allegations of grooming, trafficking, and exploitation linked to a mysterious yoga leader.
This person was being more and more set out as a kind of God on earth figure.
World of Secrets, The Bad Guru, on Radio 4 and BBC Sounds, starting this Tuesday night at 9.
BBC News at 3 o'clock. President Trump has been accused of encouraging war crimes for suggesting that Gazans could be relocated to Egypt and Jordan. Mr. Trump said Gaza was like a demolition site and needed to be cleaned out. Hamas, an Islamic Jihad group, called the idea deplorable. The UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency says it's been ordered to cease its operations in occupied East Jerusalem by Thursday. Israel says Haifa has been infiltrated by Hamas and in October passed a law banning the authorities from having contact with it. Juliet Tuma from UNRWA says the organisation's staff will have to leave East Jerusalem if their visas aren't extended. She explained what this could mean.
The direct impact is for 70,000 people who go to UNRWA clinics in occupied East Jerusalem, and just over 1,000 kids who go to UNRWA schools. So that's really the direct impact if what's in the letter is implemented.
The Treasury says its proposed planning reforms in England will take the shackles off the system and drive growth. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, told the BBC she wanted to fast-track planning applications near commuter train stations and hinted she'd support a third runway at Heathrow Airport. The Conservatives say the government has eroded business confidence. The Foreign Secretary has urged the Rwandan authorities to de-escalate the situation in the neighbouring Democratic Republic of Congo. Just over the border, Rwanda-backed rebels have surrounded the city of Goma. David Lammy said he was deeply concerned by the fighting, which has displaced many thousands of people and killed hundreds, including 13 UN peacekeepers. Winds of more than 80 miles per hour have hit southwest England in the wake of Storm Airwin, which ripped through the UK yesterday. More than 100,000 homes and businesses are still without power, and fresh yellow wind warnings are in place across Britain and Northern Ireland. The blustery weather will move north and eastwards throughout the evening. BBC News.
After the news at 4 o'clock, it's Take 4 Books. And this week, James Crawford is in conversation with the award-winning Sri Lankan-Australian writer Michelle de Kretse about her new novel, Theory and Practice, a story about colonialism, memory, and Virginia Woolf. That's to come. But now we begin our two-part new Sunday drama. Stephen Mangan narrates the comic tale of Alfred Polly, romantic, dreamer, and gentleman's outfitter.
The History of Mr. Polly by H.G. Wells. Dramatised for radio by Stephen Sheridan. Episode 1. Beginnings and the Bazaar.
In a small room above a small shop in the small Kentish town of Fishbourne, Mr. Polly was conducting a search.
Where is it? Miriam! I can't find my hat! You haven't hidden it, have you? Supper? Is that what you call it? Attempted murder, more like. Those chops are doing all sorts to my indigestion.
Well, don't blame me. Blame the mixed pickles you have with every meal. Here's your hat. It's hanging on the back of the door.
That's my old hat. The brown one. It's a stupid mud pie of a hat. I'm sick of it.
He hurled it to the floor.
I'm sick of pretty much everything, come to that.
Another tantrum. I haven't the patience.
I want my new hat, the dolphin cap. And if I can't find it, I shan't go for a walk.
To emphasise the point, he thrust his hands into his jacket pockets. And there, folded into the right one, he found his cap. To cover his embarrassment, he shot his wife a defiant look.
Lucky for you, I found. That's all I can say.
And pulling it on, he marched down the stairs, through the shop and out into the street, slamming the door behind him.
Tantrums. I haven't the patience.
Mr. Polly hoped that a country walk would revive his spirits, but an easterly wind blew through his clothing and made his teeth feel loose in his head. After an hour, he came upon a stile between two threadbare fields, and sitting himself on top of it, he began contemplating his situation.
A hole!
Beg your pardon, Mr. Polly?
A hole. That's what my life feels like. A great big gloomy cavernaceous hole, and I'm at the bottom and I can't get out.
Come, surely life must have its consolations. What about your wife?
Hate her.
Your shop then? Your little draper's shop?
Hate it.
Your neighbours?
My neighbours?
Yes.
Hate them. And do you know who I hate most of all? Myself. I hate myself for not doing anything about it.
How had it happened? How had a life once so full of hope and promise grown so empty and sad? The answer, Mr. Polly knew, lay buried deep in his past. To uncover it, he'd have to review his entire history. But where to begin? Sometime early.
The hour of my birth?
Or perhaps not that early.
All right then. My school days. Yes, my school days. Let's start there.
We will now consider the intricacies of quadratic equations. Watch carefully as I write one on the blackboard.
For the first few years of his life, Mr. Polly was cherished and cosseted by parents who doted on every inch of him. Then, when he was 7, his mother died, and his father, once so kind and loving, grew distant and cold.
And from that point on, all I remember is lessons. Lessons, till I was blue in the face.
Now then, who can tell me the value of x in the equation? Anyone? Polly?
Some schools consider it their duty to inculcate a love of learning in their pupils, opening their eyes to the beauties of the world and encouraging their enthusiasms.
Polly? Is that a book you're reading under the desk? bring it here at once.
Mr. Polly's was not such an establishment.
The Arabian Nights. Once again, I find you filling your head with fantasy and make-believe. A boy of your class has no need of such things. He needs facts and practical skills if he's to make his way in the world. Hold out your hand. I'll let my cane drive home the point.
Remarkably, Mr. Polly passed through the valley of the shadow of education with his sense of wonder still intact. But if he thought he was now free to pursue his love of reading, his father had other ideas.
It's time you started earning your keep, boy. Fortunately, I've managed to secure you an apprenticeship.
An apprenticeship? That could be interesting.
An apprentice conjurer, perhaps. Learning the art of stagecraft, soaring people in half.
Or an apprentice lighthouse keeper, saving peg-legged old sea dogs from a watery grave.
Or an apprentice surgeon, dazzling my patients with the quickness of my eye and the dexterosity of my scalpel.
Sadly not. With 6 simple words, Mr. Polly's father set him on a path that would end with him sitting miserably on a stile in the countryside some 20 years later.
You're to become an apprentice draper. Rather a lowly sounding position, I know, but think of it as a stepping stone to greater things. With hard work and sufficient application, you could easily be a junior draper by the end of the year. And after that, even senior draper could be within your grasp.
Yes. A draper? A seller of gentlemen's clothing? It was not a career Mr. Polly would have chosen for himself.
Father made it clear I had no say in the matter, so the following Monday, I took myself off to the Port Burdock Drapery and Bazaar.
And tried to feign interest as Mr. Garvace, the manager, outlined his future prospects.
I trust that all sounds agreeable.
Yes, thank you.
Good. Pick up your bag then. Show you to the door.
A large department store selling everything from pie tins to pianos. The Drapery and Bazaar kept its excess stock in a storeroom at the back of the building, and its apprentices in a dormitory directly above.
Sorry, Mr. Garvace.
Shabby, airless, and poorly lit, the dormitory comprised 6 beds with 6 chests of drawers, on top of which were 6 looking glasses.
This one's yours.
Mr. Garvace patted the bed nearest the door, sending up a small cloud of dust.
Oh, ignore the stains on the mattress. The previous occupant liked to retire with a glass of milk. He was subject to tremors. Is there anything else you need to ask?
There wasn't.
Well, let you unpack them. Join me down on the shop floor when you're finished and we'll commence your training.
Thank you, Mr. Garvace.
Being a draper isn't all glamour and excitement, you know. There's a great deal for you to learn.
When he discovered that he'd been living on the premises, Mr. Polly had hastily filled a bag with his few meagre possessions.
Books mostly. Lots and lots of books.
He decided to treat himself to a few pages of an old favourite before he went down. Reading, he found, was often a comfort in unfamiliar situations. He looked up as a fair-haired young man came in.
I'm from Polly. I've just started as an apprentice draper.
Oh, you have my sympathy, old man. I've been in it 6 months. So you're reading Ivanhoe.
Oh,
What do you think?
good story. Vibrant characters. Sometimes a little baboons.
A little baboons.
I'm sorry, I love words. I love seeing them written down. I'm not really sure how you say them.
No need to apologise, old man. I understood you perfectly. And it's a pleasure, finally, to meet a fellow reader in this benighted establishment.
You mean you like books too?
Oh, I have ambitions, old man. I hope one day to create. And you can't do that without a well-stocked mind. I'm Parsons, by the way.
He thrust out his hand.
I'm delighted to make your acquaintance. I've a feeling we're going to get on together famously.
And famously, they did.
When you're stuck behind the counter selling trousers.
Selling trousers.
When you'd sooner be out larking